Ethan Miles could feel the faint hum of the ship's engines through the soles of his boots. It was steady, reassuring in its rhythm, as though the ship itself understood the weight of the mission and promised to carry him there without fail. He stood at one of the large observation windows, watching as the stars drifted by. Somewhere beyond the quiet, glittering expanse lay Zarantia, home to a proud, ancient species that humanity had only just begun to know. It was a place of long traditions, intricate customs, and a profound distrust of outsiders. Ethan's job was to help change that. "I still don't know why they picked you," a familiar voice grumbled from behind. Ethan turned to see Alan Rourke, his old friend and former bunkmate from their academy days. Alan was broad-shouldered and perpetually rumpled, with a constant air of good-natured skepticism. "Probably because I'm so charming," Ethan replied with a smirk. "Or because I'm the only one who's crazy enough to agree." Alan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "More like you're the only one who didn't run when they heard the Zarantians were involved. You remember what happened the last time anyone tried diplomacy with them?" Ethan sighed. "I know the stories. But someone has to go. The Zarantians aren't going anywhere, and we can't afford another misunderstanding. This conference is a chance to start over, to get past the old grudges and paranoia." "Sure, but don't forget you're walking into a room full of people who probably don't want you there. People who might want to make sure you never leave." "Thanks for the pep talk," Ethan said dryly. He turned back to the window, watching as a faint, green-tinged world came into view. "Look, I'm not naive. I know this isn't going to be easy. But the way I see it, we can either keep drifting further apart, or we can start finding common ground." "Hope that optimism doesn't get you killed," Alan muttered. But despite his gruff words, he clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Just watch your back, all right? And don't trust anyone too quickly." Ethan gave a small nod. Alan's caution was justified. The Zarantians were famously territorial, and the idea of a human delegation on their home soil was controversial at best. It had taken years of negotiation just to arrange this peace conference. Ethan was determined to make the most of it. The landing was smooth, but the atmosphere on the surface was anything but. As Ethan and Alan stepped off the transport ship, they were greeted by a delegation of Zarantians, their tall, reptilian forms clad in ceremonial robes that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. The lead representative, a stern-looking male with mottled blue and green scales, stepped forward and inclined his head. "Welcome to Zarantia. I am Zarin, Chief Arbiter of the High Council," he said in a measured tone. His voice was deep, each word deliberate. "You have come a long way. We trust that your journey was uneventful." "Thank you, Chief Arbiter," Ethan said with a respectful bow of his own. "It was a smooth trip. We're honored to be here and look forward to the discussions ahead." Zarin's eyes, bright and intense, lingered on Ethan for a moment before shifting to Alan. "And this is your second delegate?" "My advisor," Ethan said smoothly. "Alan Rourke. He'll be assisting with logistical matters." Alan gave a brief nod, his expression neutral. He had spent years as a security officer before shifting to administrative work, but his instincts were sharp and Ethan trusted him to spot potential threats. Alan wasn't here for the diplomacy, he was here to keep Ethan alive and in one piece. The Zarantian delegation led them to a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings carved into the side of a massive cliff. Inside, the halls were cool and dimly lit, the walls adorned with intricate carvings depicting the Zarantians' storied history. As they passed, Ethan couldn't help but notice the wary glances from the guards stationed at every corner. The tension in the air was palpable. Once inside the conference chamber, Ethan and Alan found themselves seated at a long, crescent-shaped table alongside representatives from several other species. The Zarantians sat at the head, their presence commanding. Ethan scanned the room, noting the body language of each delegate. Some seemed curious, others suspicious. Few seemed outright hostile, but the undercurrent of unease was hard to miss. The session began with formal introductions and a series of carefully crafted opening statements. Zarin spoke first, his tone measured as he outlined the Zarantians' position. He spoke of preserving cultural heritage, ensuring territorial integrity, and fostering mutual understanding, phrases that, while diplomatic, carried a warning. Ethan listened closely, taking mental notes. When it was his turn, Ethan rose, his hands steady on the table. He began by acknowledging the long history of the Zarantian people, praising their accomplishments and expressing humanity's respect for their traditions. Then he shifted to a more personal tone. "We understand that trust must be earned," Ethan said, his voice clear and steady. "We're not here to impose our ways or demand concessions. We're here because we believe that, together, we can build something stronger, something that benefits both our people. This conference is the first step. I hope that over the coming days we can all find common ground and move toward a future where cooperation replaces conflict. There was a long pause after he finished. Zaren's expression was unreadable, but a faint flicker of something approval? Curiosity crossed his eyes before he spoke again. Well said, Delegate Miles. We look forward to hearing more of your insights. As the meeting continued, Ethan noticed that some of the other delegates seemed to relax, if only slightly. The tension didn't vanish, but the room felt a little less hostile. Alan, seated beside him, leaned in and muttered, "You're off to a decent start. Just don't let your guard down." Ethan gave a small nod. Noted. After the session, the delegates were invited to a reception in a grand hall overlooking the Zorantian capital. The view was stunning, tiered gardens, cascading waterfalls, and spires that reached toward the sky. Ethan stepped out onto a wide balcony, taking a moment to breathe in the cool evening air. Alan joined him, holding 2 glasses of a pale blue drink that the Zorantians called Vressel. "Here," Alan said, handing one to Ethan. "Not bad. A bit sweet for my taste, though." Ethan took a sip. The drink was indeed sweet, with a hint of something floral. "Not bad," he agreed. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the lights of the city below. Alan broke the silence. "So, you really think this can work? Humans and Zorantians cooperating like that?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "I don't know if it will work, but I know it has to. We've spent too long being afraid of each other. If we can prove we can do this, if we can make even one agreement stick, then maybe the next time will be easier. And the time after that." Alan chuckled. "You always were the idealist." "Someone has to be," Ethan said with a small smile. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a Zorantian delegate, a tall, elegantly scaled female with emerald eyes that gleamed in the moonlight. She wore a simple yet striking robe, her posture regal. Ethan recognized her from the conference chamber. "Delegate Miles," she said in a melodic voice. "I am Trina, Cultural Liaison for the Zorantian High Council. Your opening remarks were unexpected." Ethan turned to her, bowing his head slightly. "Unexpected in a good way, I hope." Trina tilted her head, her gaze sharp yet not unkind. "That remains to be seen. But I am intrigued. Perhaps we could speak further tomorrow? I believe we have much to discuss." "I'd be happy to," Ethan replied. Trina nodded, her expression unreadable, before turning and walking away. Alan watched her leave, then gave Ethan a sidelong glance. "Well, that's interesting." Ethan shrugged, hiding a smile. "We'll see where it leads." As the evening wore on, Ethan found himself feeling cautiously optimistic. The path ahead was far from certain, but for the first time it felt like progress might actually be possible. And for now, that was enough. Ethan adjusted the microphone on the conference table, his hands steady despite the rising tension in the room. The morning's discussion had been fraught with disagreements. Zorantian delegates argued fiercely over the conditions of the proposed cultural exchange, while representatives from a neutral planetary coalition questioned the necessity of involving humanity at all. Ethan listened, interjecting only to steer the conversation back toward common goals. "Everyone here understands the stakes," he said evenly, his voice cutting through the din. "We're not trying to erase anyone's traditions or impose our own. The goal is to find a way to share knowledge and resources without compromising what makes each of us unique." A Zorantian seated near the head of the table, Counselor Brezeth, scoffed. "Easy for you to say. Your people have only recently emerged on the galactic stage. You speak of mutual benefit, but we have yet to see a single instance where human involvement has strengthened, rather than weakened, a partnership." Ethan resisted the urge to sigh. The same argument, repeated in different ways, had echoed through every meeting. "Counselor, humanity's presence here isn't about proving superiority. It's about finding a starting point. We have much to learn from you, just as we hope to share what we've learned about our own development." Across the table, Trina, the Zorantian cultural liaison, leaned forward. "Brezeth, we cannot keep revisiting old suspicions. If the goal of this conference is to foster understanding, we must focus on actionable steps. Ethan Miles has shown a willingness to engage in open dialogue. Perhaps we should give his proposals due consideration." Brezeth's nostrils flared, but he said nothing. The room fell silent for a moment. Trina turned to Ethan, her eyes meeting his. "Do you have a specific recommendation to break this impasse?" Ethan nodded. "One suggestion would be to begin with a small-scale pilot program. A few select representatives from each side could visit one another's facilities, educational centers, research labs, so we can see firsthand what collaboration looks like. If it's successful, we expand. If not, we recalibrate. This way, no one is forced into anything long-term until there's trust." The room buzzed with low murmurs. Even Brezeth appeared to consider the idea, his scales glinting faintly under the chamber's lights. Alan, seated just behind Ethan, cleared his throat and leaned closer. Good move, he whispered. Gets them to dip their toes in without diving straight into the deep end. Ethan allowed himself a brief smile before returning his focus to the delegates. It's a simple start, he continued, but one that shows we're serious about making this work. And it gives us all time to adapt. Trina nodded thoughtfully. I will present this suggestion to the High Council. For now, let us adjourn so we can review the terms before reconvening tomorrow. The delegates rose, some muttering among themselves, others walking silently toward the exit. Alan joined Ethan as they stepped into the hallway. Not bad, Alan said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. I think you actually got through to a few of them. Hopefully it's enough to keep things moving, Ethan replied. But Brezeth won't let up easily. Alan smirked. Yeah, well, nothing worth doing ever is. He gestured down the corridor. Come on. I need a drink after all that diplomacy. The two made their way to a quiet lounge set aside for delegates. It was an understated room with low, glowing tables and transparent walls that offered a sweeping view of Zarancha's capital. Ethan ordered a mild Zarantian beverage, one he had come to tolerate, while Alan went for something more familiar, a human ale from the ship's stores. As they settled into their seats, Ethan noticed Trina entering the lounge. She looked around briefly, then approached their table. Ethan Miles. Alan Rourke, she greeted them both. May I join you? Of course, Ethan said, gesturing to an open seat. What can we do for you? Trina sat down gracefully, her movements fluid and deliberate. I wanted to discuss your proposal in more detail. It's a sound approach, but I anticipate resistance from certain council members. Brezeth, in particular, will likely push for more stringent oversight. Alan leaned back in his chair. Sounds like Brezeth is more interested in stalling than cooperating. Trina inclined her head. He is cautious. But his caution often veers into obstruction. I am concerned that if we do not present a united front, the initiative may be delayed indefinitely. Ethan set down his drink. What would help sway the council? Is there an example we can show them, something concrete that proves the concept is viable? Trina's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. If we could arrange a demonstration, a brief exchange of personnel, even for a single day, it might show the council that collaboration is possible without compromising our culture. Alan chuckled. You make it sound so simple. It would not be simple, Trina said, her tone steady. But it could be effective. Ethan nodded slowly. If we can get their approval for a one-day exchange, we can build on that success. It's a good place to start. Trina's expression softened, a flicker of gratitude in her gaze. Thank you, Ethan. Your efforts here are not unnoticed. Before Ethan could respond, a sharp chime echoed through the lounge. Trina's communicator emitted a soft, urgent tone. She glanced at it and rose. I must attend to a matter. Please excuse me. As she left, Alan raised an eyebrow at Ethan. You two seem to be getting along well. She's a valuable ally, Ethan said, though he felt the heat rise to his face. And a dedicated one. Alan smirked but let the comment pass. So, what's our next move? Keep building consensus, Ethan said. Show them we're serious and that we're not here to take over. If we can get a few key players on board, the rest might follow. Easy enough, Alan replied sarcastically. I'll just whip up a few convincing arguments while you keep smiling at the opposition. Ethan shook his head, chuckling despite himself. Come on, let's get some rest. Tomorrow's another long day. The two men left the lounge, their steps echoing through the empty corridor. As they returned to their quarters, Ethan couldn't help but think about what Trina had said. And what she hadn't. Convincing the council would be difficult, but the real challenge would be proving that humanity and Zarantians could work together without either side feeling threatened. It was a delicate balancing act, and the stakes were high. But for now, Ethan was determined to keep pushing forward. The alternative, letting fear and mistrust dominate, was no option at all. As long as he had allies like Alan and Trina, he believed they had a chance to make it work. Ethan paced the length of the conference room, the tension palpable in his every step. The morning session had barely ended when he received a discreet message from Trina. A plot was in motion to discredit the human delegation. Some within the Zarantian factions had decided that humanity's presence here was a threat, not just to their culture, but to their standing among the galaxy's other civilizations. Alan entered, carrying a datapad and 2 steaming cups of the dark Zarantian brew that Ethan still hadn't gotten used to. Thought you could use this, Alan said, setting the cups down. What's got you wearing a groove in the floor? Ethan took a cup, sipping cautiously. Trina says there's a group working behind the scenes to make sure this conference fails. If they succeed, it'll be the excuse the hardliners need to shut the door on us for good. Alan raised an eyebrow. And you trust her? I do, Ethan replied, meeting his friend's gaze. She's been consistent and open with us. She's the one who found out about the plot, and she brought it straight to me. Alan rubbed his jaw. All right, so what's the plan? We expose them, Ethan said firmly. But carefully. If we just call them out without proof, it'll backfire. We need to gather evidence and present it to the council before they have a chance to act. Alan nodded slowly. Sounds tricky, but I'm guessing Trina's got a lead. She does. There's a small communication hub near the outer gardens. According to her, it's where they're coordinating. She thinks we can intercept their transmissions without them noticing. Alan grinned faintly. You're saying we're gonna do a little sneaking around. I can get behind that. It's not exactly protocol, Ethan admitted. But if it stops this sabotage, I'm willing to bend a few rules. Good. Let's get to it. The two of them set out toward the gardens, keeping their movements casual. The Zorantian city around them shimmered in the late afternoon light, its cascading waterfalls and crystalline structures a stark contrast to the underhanded schemes they were about to confront. Alan carried a portable scanner, a piece of equipment that, while not standard diplomatic gear, came in handy more often than anyone admitted. As they approached the designated area, Trina emerged from a side path. She wore a simple cloak that blended into the greens and silvers of the surroundings, her expression calm but focused. I've been monitoring the area, she said quietly. They haven't noticed anything yet. Ethan gave her a nod. We'll move quickly. Alan's got the scanner. He'll pull the transmissions. We just need to make sure no one interrupts. Trina's gaze flicked to Alan, her sharp features unreadable for a moment before she inclined her head. Very well. Follow me. She led them along a narrow walkway, its edges lined with glowing plants that swayed gently despite the still air. Ahead, a small structure came into view, unassuming, almost ornamental. Trina stopped and gestured toward it. Inside, the equipment is hidden beneath the main console. Alan stepped forward, crouching near the panel she indicated. He pulled out the scanner and connected it to the hidden interface. This'll just take a minute, he muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. Ethan kept watch, his eyes scanning the surrounding paths. Trina stood beside him, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. You realize, she said softly, that if we're discovered, it could jeopardize everything. I know, Ethan replied, but if we don't do this, they'll win. And we'll have come all this way for nothing. Trina's eyes lingered on him, her expression softening. You take great risks for a cause that is not your own. It is my cause, Ethan said, meeting her gaze. If this conference succeeds, it helps humanity. It helps everyone. For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Alan straightened, holding up the scanner. Got it. The messages, the senders, everything we need. Let's get out of here before someone shows up. They retraced their steps, careful to avoid drawing attention. Back in the safety of the conference compound, Alan transferred the data to a secure console. Ethan and Trina reviewed the intercepted messages, their contents damning. The rogue faction's plans were clear. Spread misinformation, create dissent, and ultimately force the council to reject the evidence personally. It may not sway everyone, but it will be difficult to ignore. Alan clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Nice work, boss. You keep pulling moves like this and you might just make a real diplomat out of yourself. Ethan grinned. Don't get used to it. I still prefer when things are straightforward. As the three of them finalized their plan, Ethan couldn't help but feel a small glimmer of relief. They'd taken a risk, but it had paid off. For now at least, the path forward seemed a little clearer and they had allies who were willing to stand with them. Ethan stood at the conference room's main window, staring out over the vibrant landscape of Zorantia's capital. He took in the sight of cascading waterfalls and the intricate spires of crystalline buildings that shimmered under the midday sun. Behind him, the low hum of quiet conversation filled the chamber. The day's final session had ended and the room was gradually clearing as delegates dispersed. Do you think it's enough? Alan's voice cut through the air as he joined Ethan at the window, his arms crossed and his expression skeptical. I mean, the evidence is strong, but you know how politics work. Ethan sighed. It's never a guarantee, but it's a step forward. We have the rogue faction's transmissions, Trina's support, and a growing number of council members warming to the idea. It's more than we had when we arrived. Alan smirked. I'll give you that. You've got a knack for getting people to listen. Well, Ethan said, half laughing, it helps when you have someone like Trina in your corner. She's been crucial, her insights, her ability to read the room. I don't think we'd be here without her. As if summoned by her mention, Trina appeared in the doorway. She glanced around, then approached them, her long strides graceful as ever. Ethan. Alan. The council has agreed to hold a formal vote tomorrow. The evidence you uncovered has swayed several undecided members. That's good news, Ethan said, relief easing the tightness in his chest. And you're certain we have enough support? Trina gave a small nod. It's not unanimous, but it doesn't need to be. The majority seems willing to proceed. Alan chuckled. Guess that means you're one persuasive diplomat after all. Ethan shook his head. It wasn't just me. Trina, you've been. Enough, Trina said, though her tone was light. This was a group effort. I only provided information. It was your persistence that carried the argument. Alan grinned. Sounds like teamwork to me. What do you say we toast to that? I think we've earned it. Ethan smiled and turned to Trina. Care to join us? Trina hesitated for a moment before inclining her head. Very well. A short celebration. The three of them made their way to a quiet lounge in the complex's eastern wing. The room was softly lit with seating arranged around a low central table where glasses of Zorantian Vressel were already prepared. They each took a glass, the faintly blue liquid catching the light as they raised a silent toast. To progress, Alan said, his grin wide. And to keeping our heads intact. They all chuckled softly and sipped. The drink was still too sweet for Ethan's taste, but in that moment it didn't matter. As the evening wore on, their conversation shifted from politics to lighter topics. Alan recounted a particularly absurd mishap from their academy days, drawing laughter from both Ethan and Trina. In return, Trina shared a humorous tale of a Zorantian festival gone hilariously wrong when a minor translation error led to unexpected chaos. Ethan found himself marveling at how easily Trina joined in their banter, her usual formality giving way to genuine warmth. He noticed the way her eyes lit up when she laughed and the graceful way she gestured as she spoke. The connection they'd built during the conference sessions felt stronger here, away from the pressures of diplomacy. As the laughter died down, Alan stretched and stood. Well, I hate to break up the party, but I should probably check in on our comms. Make sure nothing's brewing overnight. Ethan gave him a nod. Good idea. I'll meet you back at the quarters in a bit. Alan clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder before leaving, casting a knowing look in Trina's direction. Ethan ignored it, turning back to her with a faint smile. Thank you, Trina said after a moment, her voice softer than usual. For including me in this. Of course, Ethan replied. You've done more than your share to help us get here. I'm glad you could join us. Trina studied him for a moment, her gaze searching. You have a way of making people feel at ease. It's not something we often see in these proceedings. I just try to be honest, Ethan said. If I want people to trust me, I need to be open with them. She tilted her head, her eyes thoughtful. And you trust me? Ethan nodded without hesitation. Absolutely. You've been upfront with us from the beginning, and you've put yourself on the line to help make this conference a success. I trust you, Trina. A flicker of something passed over her face, surprise, perhaps, or something more. That means a great deal, she said quietly. More than you may realize. They fell into a companionable silence, the quiet hum of the lounge providing a soothing backdrop. After a while, Trina shifted slightly closer. Ethan, I have a question. Ask away, he said. What is it, she began, her voice hesitant, that drives you to do all this? To take these risks for a cause that many would consider, not your responsibility. Ethan thought for a moment, then spoke. It's not just about humanity. It's about proving that we can coexist, that different species, with all our differences, can still find common ground. If we can manage that even a little, it's worth every risk. Trina regarded him intently. You are unlike many others I have met. I could say the same about you, Ethan said, smiling. You're not afraid to stand up for what you believe in, even when it's unpopular. That's rare. She looked away briefly, a faint hue spreading across her scales. When she turned back, her expression was gentle. Ethan, there is much we can learn from one another. I hope that whatever comes next, we continue to find that common ground. So do I, Ethan said. I've learned a lot from you already, and I'm sure there's more to come. The moment lingered, the air between them charged with unspoken thoughts. Ethan didn't know where this connection would lead, but he knew it was worth pursuing. As they sat there, the sprawling city of Zarantia glowing in the distance, he felt that, together, they might just have a chance to build something lasting. The sun dipped below the crystalline spires of the Zarantian capital as Ethan, Alan, and Trina gathered in a small meeting room. The council had just voted, officially endorsing the pilot exchange program. The announcement had brought relief to Ethan, but he knew the hard work was only beginning. "All right," Alan said, leaning back in his chair. "They approved the program. What's next?" Ethan glanced at Trina. "We need to plan the first exchange. A group of our researchers, a group of theirs, one neutral meeting site. Nothing too big at first, just enough to show that collaboration can work." Trina nodded. "That makes sense. I suggest selecting a scientific project that benefits both parties. Something that demonstrates practical value without touching on sensitive cultural traditions." Alan smirked. "You're saying we don't want our folks arguing over who's got the better music or art, right?" Trina gave him a faint smile. "Precisely. A neutral scientific endeavor will keep the focus on mutual benefit." Ethan tapped a pen against his notebook. "What about the agricultural initiative? Our biologists have been studying how to grow Zarantian crops in earth soil. It's practical and it ties directly to food security, something everyone values." "That could work," Trina agreed. "It's a field that allows both sides to bring their expertise to the table without triggering cultural defenses." Alan shrugged. "All right, but how do we keep things from going sideways if someone on either side doesn't play nice?" "We'll have monitors in place," Ethan replied. "Both Zarantian and human representatives overseeing the project. Transparency at every step. That way, no one can claim they were kept in the dark." Trina inclined her head. "And we will emphasize that this is only the beginning. A trial. If it succeeds, it opens the door to more ambitious collaborations." "Sounds like a solid plan," Alan said, leaning forward. "But let's not forget the rogues we exposed. They might not give up just because the vote didn't go their way." Ethan frowned. "You're right. They might try to discredit the program or sabotage the exchange." "Then we'll stay vigilant," Trina said. "I'll keep my network active. If they attempt to interfere, we'll address it swiftly." "Good," Alan said. "Last thing we need is another surprise." Ethan smiled. "With the three of us on it, I think we'll be okay." They spent the next hour refining the details of the pilot exchange. Ethan felt a growing sense of camaraderie as they worked together, their distinct perspectives blending into a cohesive plan. Despite the challenges ahead, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were onto something meaningful. As they wrapped up, Alan stretched and stood. "I'll draft a report for the council so we're all on the same page. Might as well get started now." "I'll check on the agricultural research team," Trina said. "Make sure they're prepared to engage with the humans." Ethan rose as well, collecting his notes. "I'll reach out to our delegation. Let's meet again tomorrow to finalize everything." Alan gave him a nod and left the room, whistling softly. Trina paused by the door. "Ethan." He looked up. "What is it?" She hesitated, her expression unreadable for a moment. "You said earlier that this partnership benefits humanity as much as Zarantia. But I've seen how much you've given of yourself to make it happen." "Why?" Ethan smiled. "Because it matters. If we can find a way to work together, it's better for everyone. And because I believe it's the right thing to do." Trina studied him for a moment longer before nodding. "Then I will ensure that we succeed." He watched her leave, her words resonating in his mind. As much as he believed in the mission, he knew it was the people around him, Alan, Trina, the teams on both sides, that would make or break their efforts. Together, they were carving out a new path, one step at a time.